Hi, this is Laurie at Twisted Tines Garden. It's been rainy here, so we wanted to bring you inside the kitchen for a baking day. And today I'm going to show you how we bake pizza at home. I like the King Arthur recipe for this one. We're not affiliated with them, but I like their products. So you'll see some of those here that we're going to use today. We'll have all of the list of ingredients in the description below if you want to check them out. So let's get started with the ingredients. I have 2 cups of all-purpose flour, 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt, 1/2 teaspoon of yeast, 3/4 of a cup of lukewarm water, and I'm going to add a tablespoon of olive oil in just a minute. I also have, which is not in the recipe, that I like to use the pizza dough flavor. If you don't have this, don't worry about it. Otherwise, if you have a powdered cheese, you can mix that in. And I also like to use pizza seasoning. This is a blend of oregano, basil, and thyme. If you have red pepper flakes, you can add that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything into our mixing bowl. So I'm going to carefully dump this into the bowl. You want to make sure when you're measuring out your flour that you don't compact it, otherwise that'll make a really dense dough. So I added the 2 cups of flour. Now I'm going to add in our 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Now instead of just adding the yeast right into the bowl, like the directions might tell you, I like to put it in the warm water and mix it around so it can start to bubble and activate. And you want to make sure it is not too hot and not too cold. It's like a Goldilocks water temperature. If it's too cold, the yeast won't activate, and if it's too hot, they'll actually start to die off. So we'll let that sit here for just a minute. And I can scoop out 2 teaspoons of the pizza dough flavor. You want about 1 teaspoon per cup. And the same with the seasoning. They don't have to be exact. So as that's starting to bubble, let me go ahead and add the tablespoon of olive oil. And lastly, we have our yeast and water. All right, let's get it over to the mixer. So now we'll go ahead and get it on the mixing stand. Now if you don't have a standard mixer at home, you can certainly follow the instructions that are in the recipe that we'll have linked below. I'm just locking it in place, and I'm going to put it on the lowest setting for the next 7 to 10 minutes and get it all mixed up. It's been 7 minutes. So what I'm going to do is take the dough off of the hook, put it back into the bowl, take the hook out of the machine, and now we have a nice, soft, pillowy dough. Hopefully you can see that. And we'll just kind of put it into a ball and put the ball back in the bowl. And then cover it with a damp kitchen towel, or I have a tea towel that I'll just lay over top, and we'll be back in a couple of hours. So now that it's been a little over 2 hours, we've given the dough a chance to rise, and we'll take a look at it. Be sure when you do let it rise, I should have mentioned earlier, that you try to put it in a warm place in case the kitchen is cold. If you have a second floor like I do, I tend to put it upstairs. But it's gotten much bigger, if you can see that, I hope. And then when we kind of touch it, it pops back, and it's nice and soft and pillowy. Before we work on this any further, let's go ahead and get the oven preheated. Since I'm using our convection oven, I'm going to put that at 425. If you're using a conventional oven, you'll want 450. All right, so that'll have a chance to preheat, get nice and warm, but now we'll have a chance to work out our dough, add our toppings, and then pop it in the oven. So what you're going to want to do, I have a crisper pan here. It's basically a round cookie sheet that has holes perforated, so it's good for pizza or other things if you want to make them nice and crispy. Otherwise, if you want to do as the recipe says, you can use a cast iron skillet. If you want to do that, just be sure to oil it first. Make sure you get the sides as well as the bottom. If you haven't oiled it before, if you want to, you can use a wet paper towel, and that kind of helps you spread it out. Otherwise, I just put cooking spray on this one. So let's go ahead and dump it out. Might need a little help. It should just be a little bit sticky, but not so much as when we were first mixing it. I'm just picking out the little bits in there by my hands here. Don't want to waste it. So now what I want to do, I'll coat both sides. You can see now it's shiny. It's got a little oil on both sides so it won't stick to my pan. And what I'm going to do here is spread out the dough. The purpose of this will be to make sure it's about even all the way across so that it bakes better. If you're doing it in a cast iron skillet, just kind of make it even with the top as much as possible. I want to use the knuckles on my fingers and not my fingernails so I don't poke any holes. Makes it a little easier. Alright, so you may have noticed as I was going around there might be extra lumps and bumps that are thicker in places than others. I'm just trying to scoot some of that dough across so that it's nice and even, again, so it bakes evenly. Once you get it to the thickness that you want, and it kind of all feels about the same, I take my finger and just kind of push down a little bit to make some indentations to kind of help it bake a little more evenly. If you want to, you can do fancy things with the crusts, make it a little bit higher so that your cheese stays on. Personal preference, however you want to do it. It doesn't have to look pretty, it's going to taste good anyway, and I'm sure it'll be just fine. So you should be able to get one 9 or 10 inch round pizza. I just kind of use the gauge where the edge of the pizza pan perforations are and push it out until that far. Now if you wanted to make a second pizza crust, you can certainly just easily double the recipe. And then after it's risen, cut it in half, and now you have 2 crusts for 2 different pizzas, or 2 of the same. Alright, that looks good to me, so we'll go ahead and get it topped. First thing I want to do, now my pizzas are a little bit different. We don't always use sauce. You could certainly use a tomato sauce, marinara sauce. If you like pesto, feel free to add that. I like to put olive oil on the bottom of mine. It helps to kind of brown up the crust on the bottom of the dough, and it helps keep it from getting soggy. The other thing that we like to do is put down the cheese first. If you're going to add sauce, cheese, sauce, cheese, toppings. Again, that helps prevent sogginess. I know it might sound weird, but cheese first. But since I'm not using sauce, I'm going to put some olive oil on here. We have a local vendor that sells this, and it's delicious. This one's garlic infused. So I'm just going to drizzle this on. I happen to have a pastry brush to brush it on. If you want to do this and don't have one, use the back of a spoon. So I just want to brush it evenly across the entire surface all the way out to the edge of the crust. And again, if you're doing this in a cast iron or other shaped pizza pan, go ahead and do the same for that. And again, it's just a nice thin layer. Acts as a little barrier, gives it an extra bit of flavor. You could use the same dough recipe if you wanted to make things like garlic knots or breadsticks, and then this is a great way if you wanted to add some olive oil, maybe sprinkle some extra herbs or cheese on top and bake that off. Though I would cut it up first and then bake. Alright, how's the oven doing? Getting there. So next I'm going to put my layer of cheese. Don't use all of the cheese. This will be roughly 1.5 cups. You're going to want to put about 1 cup on the bottom, and that just again acts as a barrier between the dough and the rest of the toppings to help it keep from getting soggy. For our pizza tonight, I'm using a Mexican blend of cheeses. You can certainly use mozzarella or your favorite or whatever's left over in the fridge. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. As Mom always said, it'll still taste good. Okay. That looks good to me. So next I have over here some cherry tomatoes, as I said, bell peppers, olives, and basil from the garden. So I'm going to put the bell peppers down first and then add the tomatoes. It doesn't really matter what the order of your toppings are. You can certainly use meats if you want to, or all veggies that we happen to have tonight. Sometimes we'll put cubed ham that's already cooked on here with some pineapple. I know, we're those pizza people. You can certainly use cooked chicken if you want to cube that up. I just like to make them bite-sized pieces because it's easier to eat. Just be sure if you do use meat that it's cooked first. I think there's more pepper than we actually need for this evening, so that's fine. I'll add our tomatoes. These unfortunately are not from our garden. We're still waiting on those to come in. And again, just kind of spread it out evenly across the top of the pizza so that everybody gets some. Now come for the olives. It's a great way to use up whatever is left over in the refrigerator, like tonight. And I'm going to top the rest of the cheese and then sprinkle some of the basil in here. Sort of acts as like a protective barrier. If you happen to be using the cast iron skillet, as I keep mentioning, just be mindful with the cheese. You may notice it's going to start to brown or burn if it gets onto the edge of the pan, but that's okay. You can just kind of cut around that when you go to take the pizza out of the pan. And who doesn't like crunchy bits? Okay, I think this is about ready. Just put that last little bit of cheese on and we'll be good and ready for the oven. Let me get washed up and then we'll put this in the oven. So our 16 minutes is up. As you can see, it's nice and golden brown. That extra thin layer of cheese got an extra bit of golden brown. We notice that it's all done when the outside has a nice little knock. I always like to let the pizza cool on the stovetop for an extra minute or so after it comes out, just to make sure everything is set up. Otherwise, if it's piping hot, it'll be really hard to cut, much like if you take hot bread out of the oven. So now that I've loosened it up from the pan with my spatula, I'm going to slide it right off of here and onto my cutting board. Now hopefully if you've oiled yours just like I did mine, it slides right off. Might need to finagle it a little bit more if you're using that cast iron skillet. So now we are all good to go. You may notice we have a special cutting board, and I'll show you our knife here in just a minute. We make pizza in this house often, so we have one that has grooves to help you with cutting those lines. So we hope that you enjoyed baking with me today. I forgot to mention earlier that if you're looking at that King Arthur recipe, be sure to scroll all the way down. There's actually a gluten-free option if you want to check that out. Though if you do try this recipe, let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. We hope you enjoyed baking with me today. Be sure to stay tuned for new garden and kitchen videos. We're going to go and cut this pizza up and have some dinner, so catch you later.